Hello YouTube and welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at forging early medieval tongs. This style of tongs was used pretty much from the Iron Age all the way up until the medieval period. If you'd like to make yourself a set of these tongs, please consider purchasing the drawings. Currently priced at £10, they have dimensions in metric and imperial. It helps support the channel and the work I do with my historical reconstructions. In order to indulge myself a little bit, I'm going to be using my collection of early medieval hammers to forge these. So I'm using my carpenter's square to mark these up. I quite enjoy using it because I can set it and chalk along the edge. And then centre dot the marks and pop it into the fire. So we're going to start off by forging out the reins. With a lot of tapers, I like forging out the tip first and getting that nut set in nice and accurately. So here I am forging it to a square section. You'll notice it is wider than the parent bar, which is what we want. Just double check the measurement. And a good scrub. Once the very end of the taper is set to where I want it, I will then start forging back, pulling that taper towards that lowest centre mark. Nice overlapping regular hammer blows to ensure you have a nice smooth surface. Like so. So here we have our square taper. So the next thing I'm going to do is actually start forging the very end to a rounded section. We want the end of these tongs to be rounded. It'll make it a lot more comfortable for you to hold on to. And we're going to go through octagon, then the famous 16 faceagon. And I'm going to work on beveling in the corners of these reins all the way up to the hinge plate. We've all forged tongs where we've left the reins nice and crisp. It looks nice, but it's damned uncomfortable to hold on to. So just extend that rounded section and pretty much radius those corners as you go up. Again, overlapping hammer blows, and you'll notice I quite like coming into a low heat. This helps to planish the material as you go along, giving you a nice smooth and clean finish. Like so. I quite like doing the reins first. It gives me a bit more stock to hold on to as I start working on the nibs. So next we're going to draw out those nibs between the upper centre dot and the end of the bar. Now again, I'm going to forge down the very tip, get that very close to the size and shape that I want, and then draw that taper back to the centre dot mark. And instead of forging this in to draw it out, I am actually upsetting it back on itself as I'm forging down the taper. This is because these need to be wider than the parent bar. And you'll notice as well that I've forged this as a fishtail taper, and I'm offsetting it off to the right as you are looking down the taper. So once the very end of the nibs are formed, I am going to pull that taper back up to the start of the hinge plate. And again, nice, slow, overlapping hammer blows in order to ensure a nice, crisp, clean finish. And remember to keep scrubbing your work. So I'll just upset and square off the end a little bit, remove any distortion from the tapering process. And then check for straightness. Make sure all your lines are where you expect them to be. It turns out this is quite a pleasant hammer to use. I quite like using this one. The weight feels quite nice and comfortable. And here we have both halves of the tongs. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to put that starting bend in the hinge plate. In order to make this nice and accurate, I'm going to quench either side of where I want the bend to be, and the bend is going to be located around that lower centre dot. And I'm just going to bend the nibs downwards roughly 45 degrees. And if you've made one half of the tongs already, keep comparing to ensure that you are making two identical pieces. This will help a lot when you come to fit these together. Like so. So the next stage is to quench it off on the bend that we've just put in. Quench off the end of the nibs because we want those to remain relatively straight. And we're just going to come onto the bick and bend the reins back down again. Control the location of the bend by your placement on the bick. Keep straightening and squaring up, and if you've made half of the tongs already, keep comparing so you have two identical pieces. Occasionally chuck everything on the floor. And here we have two identical half tongs. So at this stage, having put those bends in, we're actually going to pull the reins the rest of the way in order to ensure a taper from the base of the hinge plate all the way down to the tip of the reins. I left this till this stage because I didn't want to encourage any distortion during the bending process on the thinner parts of the reins. And it's really a one heat job. Just get it warm and pull that taper the rest of the way. So, having done that, we're now going to punch the rivet holes. And that is the purpose of that lower centre dot where we put that first bend. So you can use a smaller punch and then drift these to size. I'm going to punch and drift at the same time. And in order to do this, we're going to simply punch 2/3 of the way through, and then we'll turn it over and punch in from the other side. And here we go. This will shear the slug. This is when you come onto your bolster plate and basically spit it out the other side of your iron. And here we have the two halves punched. So at this stage we're going to work on riveting them together. I've cut myself a piece of round bar that will simply drop into the hole. Now, in order to prevent this falling out in the fire as I'm heating it, I will gently mushroom both ends of this piece of round bar to help lock it in place. I quite like using a slightly chunky piece of round bar for this. It saves it bending during the riveting process. And you can see I'm hovering the tongs themselves off of the anvil. That's because I don't want the mushrooming to catch inside either of the rivet holes. And I'll use the same process during the actual riveting. So then we will pop into the fire. And start getting some heat in there. Ensure you're heating up both sides of the rivet as evenly as possible. And then again, hovering the tongs over the anvil will start actually peening those heads in. And you can see I'm coming in from an angle to go around the edges to give myself a slightly more domed head. Ideally, you should aim to do this in a single heat operation to save having to reheat it. I quite like to get these tong rivets nice and tight. I'm not worried about it seizing because at a red heat I'll gently open and close the tongs in order to make sure that they function properly. Like so. Now when you're doing this, you want to ensure that there's not too much heat coming up the reins, otherwise you'll end up just bending the reins and distorting them. You want that heat ideally around the hinge plate itself. And then whilst you're opening and closing them, quench off the tongs. This will ensure good function You can test them for side rattle as well, if your hinge plates aren't flush. But the advantage of these flat hinge plates is that they do quite like to sit flat against each other. Now you'll notice because of the setup, the nibs themselves don't currently line up. So the next stage will be to gently curve these in order to ensure that the jaws close square. Now instead of bending them downwards over the edge of the anvil, I'm actually going to gently hammer them on the inside and slowly raise my hand in order to create an internal curve that allows the jaws to meet up. Like so. And then just very gently ensure that they fit together nice and square. Square off the nibs. And make sure they're central compared to the reins themselves. And then the final thing I'm going to look at doing is ensuring that the reins themselves align. I'm going to do this cold over the hardy hole. And again, I'm just going to gently curve them in towards the belly of the tongs, like so. And this will make them more comfortable and provide you with a better grip when you're holding your materials. And here we have the completed tongs. These have come out quite nice and clean and elegant. They are quite a funky design by modern standards. We have no side rattle, but they open and close quite nicely. The downside to these tongs is that they are for broad general use. They have no grooves for gription, and therefore material can slip side to side a little bit. I believe most of these tongs would have been used in pairs in conjunction with a smith and striker setup, like so. But I can't demonstrate that because I work on my own. This other set that I've made have slightly upward curved nibs. That was a test to see if that helped. And here are the end of the nibs. Nice and parallel, nice and in line with the tongs themselves, with the mouth of the nibs curving off to the side, curving off to the hinge plate. Thank you for watching.